Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm Andy Williams.
I'm Emily Horgan, and we have a guest today, Joe Redfern.
We do indeed. We're delighted to welcome Emma Hardie, who is Executive Commercial and Brand Director at Aardman today. And do you know what? It started in Cannes, didn't it, Emma?
Always, everything starts in Cannes.
we were having drinks on the Croisette, and Emma was saying to me about how it's been a pivotal time at Aardman, this real kind of shift of mindset for the studio, moving away from this kind of broadcast first mindset into a more fan first and direct to consumer mindset. And immediately I said, okay, we need to hear more about that. And so here we are. So thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to hand over to you, Emma. Just tell us about this shift that's underway at Aardman and what it's meant for you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, so it's a real privilege. Yeah, I think, it's been, so I joined Aardman kind of almost 2 years ago, and it was a really interesting time, post-COVID. We had, amazing opportunity with some great films with Chicken Run sequel and with, The Vengeance Most Foul, which has broken, all known records on the BBC, which is wonderful. But I think the studio kind of at that time was seeing, what we're all seeing really is that this big pivot for brands to kind of need to be always on, to be, part of their fans' lives in a way that hasn't kind of existed in the same way before. And I think for us, we've had 7 series of Shaun the Sheep. We're making our 11th feature film at the moment, Shaun the Sheep, Beast of Mossy Bottom. And I think that will always be part of this. So I guess it's probably more nuanced than broadcast first to fan first. It's almost sort of, rather than broadcast specific or broadcast only, we're thinking much more about actually our audiences as our clients as well. How can we think much more deeply about where they are and where they expect to see us? Where do they want to see Wallace and Gromit, Shaun the Sheep, Morph, Very Small Creatures? All of our characters should and can show up in different ways for them. So I think what has been really exciting for me is helping to kind of pivot our brands and licensing team to be much more focused and, enabled to do that. And that's meant, a new structure and great new expertise coming in, which has been really, exciting, and big changes, to a company that's 50 years old this year. It's a lot to kind of think about, but I think we feel as a studio quite excited, and there's some early things we're trying and testing and partners we're talking to that feel like a big next step really.
And how did that manifest? I mean, as somebody who's familiar with the 50 figure, it's not easy to learn new things in your 50s. How does that manifest when you're Aardman? Like you said, bit of a restructure. You've got to think about a wider skill set, a broader skill set.
Yeah, and I think at its heart, actually, Aardman has always been really innovative. I mean, Nick Park joined when he was 23, I think, with the first Wallace and Gromit film. He was a student. So there's that ethos of trying new things that has always been embedded. And I think we still celebrate, we've got the Aardman Academy, which started with the first Chicken Run film. And so we've always got new talent coming through. But I think that there is something about the brand growth that maybe that innovation hadn't touched, I think, until more recently. And now that feels, really kind of a much more collaborative studio-wide approach to that innovation, I guess. It's thinking about, we will always have our films and our series with that authored creative. I think that's really important to say, is that's what the delight and the fascination with Aardman's comedy and characters is in that, those creatives that have those ideas. But I think in terms of how we grow the brand beyond the films and series, that is where we need to lean much closer into what the fans, want and expect to some extent. So thinking about, you guys know a lot of this, but the experiences, we've had a great history of doing some amazing things, but actually leaning more into that. We had Longleat Festival of Light, which broke kind of records for them, which was fantastic in terms of ticket sales, I think, before they opened. We've just had real success actually with a game for Wallace and Gromit. So Powerwash Simulator, which I don't know if you guys have ever tried, but that's done brilliantly for us. And I think starting to see, these other areas as key brand drivers alongside the films and series, so that they're really contributing to the creative ecosystem of the brands rather than a derivative of the films or the series. They are creative, kind of exciting experiences in and of themselves, and that goes for books as well, which we've done a lot of in the past, but I think is an exciting area too. So it's just much more collaboration between, I think, our creative teams and our brand and licensing teams to explore those narrative worlds and think about how can we celebrate them in different formats? How can we kind of add to that?
That's really interesting. And does that kind of including the fans more in that kind of dialogue and having that conversation, is that inspiring new creative as well for the team?
I think, we've always loved hearing what our audiences think. I mean, just seeing some of the comments after the films. But definitely, I think we want to invite fans in more. I mean, last year we launched a competition on TikTok for fans to show who was the biggest fan of Shaun the Sheep, with the chance to be immortalized in clay as a puppet in the new film. And that's a money can't buy prize. I mean, it's for a fan, that's so sort of bringing them into our world. But I think also, how can we help them feel part of the future, as you say? And whilst we're not inviting kind of our audiences to direct the narrative of our films, that's sort of with our kind of creators and their worlds. But I think, things like, I'm happy to actually, it's a bit of an announcement for you guys.
An exclusive.
Which is exciting, which I'm happy to share. So it is our 50th year. And so we are doing a new social series on Instagram called The Clayoffs. And we kind of wanted to put, I guess, the power slightly into the hands of the fans to discover which of our characters stands, head above and shoulders above the rest. So across the year on our official Aardman account, all of our characters are going to go head to head in battles using polls.
Amazing.
And so we're inviting the fans to join in and back their favorite, essentially. So it's a kind of, it's whilst it's not directing narrative specifically, it's a great insight into what our fans love about our characters, and I'm interested to see where the final, the order of the final 50. But I think that is, we love to try and encourage people to come into the world in that way.
The thing that would strike me is that the user-generated digital era that we're in now hasn't sat so comfortably with traditional pipelines of production, because producing animation and stop motion animation, like Aardman are known for, takes so long, right? So how are you guys managing to find ways to make that work? Because that's kind of, it'd be lovely to bring fans in to all the detail of, claymation and all that kind of stuff. But when, a shot might take 3 months to produce, and that's just for one shot. Like how are you guys managing to bridge the gap there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the answer is in lots of different ways and lots of experimentation. I think the site we're on in Bristol, we have two sites, and actually one at Gasferry Road and one at Aztec West. And Gasferry Road, where the Aardman Academy is really quite a small studio where we shoot some of our commercials. But that's actually where The Wrong Trousers was made. And now, of course, we're in an 88,000 square foot studio for our feature films. But, there is, again, at the heart is innovation and a sense of being clever with limited resources or time pressure or, budget. So I think for, some of the things we're looking at is, as you say, for social, how can you turn around something quickly that discusses cultural kind of relevant narrative of what's going on in the world, and also which character does that feel right for? I think there's a question, that's something we have to think about. Where are we putting our characters and how are they engaging? Is it right for one character to comment on Harry Styles' new album or versus another, and how does everyone get involved in playing that? So how do the characters play in that world? And then in terms of technique, we have some great spaces where we encourage the animators and creatives to play and to experiment. We've there's different techniques we've used over the past. So some of you might remember Rex the Runt, which was a great series from back in the day, but that was all shot on plates, so rather like Kiri and Lou. So so that's a different way of approaching it. We're looking at how we do background sets differently versus the puppet animation. We've done a great digital first series for Timmy called Timmy Tunes last year, which was 2D, a new 2D design for Timmy. So there's lots of different ways where I think we're just thinking, how can we interpret the characters, and how can we, as you say, do it in such a way that feels authentic to what the fans expect? Because there is, with all this technology that we have now, there is no point using it if it undercuts what the craft and it is and the fans love. So yes, we explore technology as a tool, and even thinking about different AI tools, but I think it is always in service of the craft. It's how can we use it to experiment, and also what's the audience's expectation in different formats. What they might expect for a film versus what they might expect on social and TikTok is completely different. We have all a different lexicon, a different language on those platforms, so it's adapting our techniques as well to those platforms.
And that is one of the advantages of having such globally recognized IP, aside from the fact that you can use different technologies on different platforms. And you're right to acknowledge that there's different expectations from the audiences there. But what underpins that and makes it easier to do, I guess, is when you've got globally recognized IP, it does stretch easier. It's recognizable, even if it's in 2D in an interactive environment or in some short form social content. But actually, users still really love that tactile feeling that it is, prevalent in the movies. I want to go back to what you were saying about obviously looking at this kind of ecosystem strategy now. I was really interested when you and I were chatting about just the multifaceted fandom around Aardman characters. Of course, there's 50 years of it. And what was really interesting was just when you were digging into, you've got different demographics, you've got different geographical kind of fandoms. And I hadn't really thought about that. So how are you managing and how are you planning for that?
Yeah, it's a really, ultimately it's great fun because you're understanding loads of different audiences in loads of different markets. But, our fandom in the UK, for example, in Europe for Shaun the Sheep is, as one might imagine, for kids and for their families, and that's kind of heartland. But in Japan, it's much older demographic. It's kind of, skews female, and it's generally 20s and 30s. So it's a completely different kind of basis from which to build a brand. And it determines, what kind of brand extensions you might go for. So, for example, our licensing strategy in Japan looks very, very different, and it is aimed at products for those demographics versus, the kind of more kids-oriented product lines that we might do in the UK. Now, interestingly, because of this kind of absolute global trend of seeing, Korean and Japanese kind of trends coming into the UK, a lot of what we're doing in Japan is now we're thinking about how do we bring that back over here for a slightly different demographic. And we've just done a really lovely range with M&S for Wallace and Gromit, which was for 9 to 16-year-olds. So, that's kind of an apparel range. So that's been brilliant to see, but that's a slightly different, pitch, I guess, and with design, very kind of new design that feels much more akin to something that we might look for internationally. So yeah, to your point, we do have very different fandoms for each brand. There's a big Aardman fandom, there's a big animation kind of community that want to know what we're up to. There's a really kind of deep fandom around Wallace and Gromit, particularly in the UK, because of that nostalgia for seeing it on the BBC. And then for Shaun, Shaun is in 170 territories around the world, at our series. It's got incredible breadth, but actually, the benefits of Shaun is because it's non-dialogue, that opens up a lot of opportunity for content to travel as well, more freely. And alongside that, kind of, all the other kind of product brand extensions. But in Japan, we've got an amazing kind of farm experience where we have rebuilt the farmer's house from Shaun the Sheep in real life at real size, and you can kind of visit it. I've been there. It was absolutely incredible. People get married there.
Wow.
It is
Whereabouts in Japan?
It's about a couple of hours outside Tokyo, and it is just it's a place called Rosa and Berry English Rose Garden, and it's beautiful. It's got workshops. There's a bakery. You can bake Shaun shaped buns. But I expect to see families there because and actually it was all couples in their 20s on dates. And that is the fandom we have there. So we've restructured as, again, kind of in the way we work, so that across our brands and licensing team, where we have content sales, we have licensing teams, we have attractions, live events, brand and digital and social. So across each of those teams, we have kind of territory experts, so that we have a real scrum, if you like, of experts around Japan who all understand how to interact and support each other in growing and what the opportunities might be coming from each area. And in our key markets, that's sort of how we started to work. And it's been brilliant, actually, to get that depth of knowledge and that communication kind of to grow a brand in a market that is quite different to the UK.
Yeah, and then no, you go, Andy.
I was just following up on that. I was intrigued to hear whether there are any particular characters from Aardman that really appeal in Japan that are kind of a surprise, or kind of what the kind of the big brands are for Aardman in Japan.
Shaun the Sheep is the biggest in Japan by far. Yep. That's really kind of been fantastic. But I think in terms of sort of the things that surprise us, I guess, it was wonderful to see after Vengeance Most Foul that people in China are getting tattoos of Feathers McGraw, and it was in the China Morning Post. That was a kind of not expected, I would say. And Gromit is hugely popular in South Korea. Wallace and Gromit as a brand, but particularly we have a lot of Gromit plush, and that does incredibly well, kind of the cute kind of factor. So yeah, it's really interesting to see what works. And Indonesia does, Indonesia is probably one of the strongest territories, interestingly, on our socials and our YouTube. So we're exploring kind of more live experience opportunities there. So there's, there is a lot of regionally specific opportunities, but we are lucky to have a great fan base on YouTube and social. I think we've got about 30 million subscribers on YouTube and about 10 million across our social channels. And so that data has become increasingly important in talking to those next stage of brand growth, understanding where we should focus our efforts. Because we are a relatively small team. I think we're, in terms of brands and licensing, 30 people or so across all of those different areas. So we have to really focus and prioritize. But I think that's, the benefit really of having a great squad to take the brands where we can take them.
And how are you seeing that extension into real life, like, pay off, right? Because it drives revenue, but also like that kind of, it also drives fandom in of itself.
Definitely. I mean, we saw a lot of great social content around Longleat. That was such an immersive experience. I don't know if any of you guys had the chance to go, but there was, the scale of it was exceptional. The craft,
Describe it for international.
Oh, okay. So Longleat is wonderful. It's an incredible location, stately home and kind of safari park. And around each Christmas time, they have an amazing lantern experience, sort of walk through lantern experience outside that gets lit up in the evening. And is just a work of art. And they partner with incredible craftspeople to create these lanterns out of hand-painted silk. So there was a really, there's a real craft kind of alignment for us with what they do. And we were delighted, just to partner with them this year on it. And it took you through an anthology of all of our films and characters. So everything from Morph to Early Man to Shaun the Sheep, Farmers Llamas, then we had an amazing West Wallaby Street, all recreated, the actual street in lanterns. And Chicken Run was there. I mean, it was really a whole Aardman experience, and music too, and audio as well as you went around. So it kind of, again, that immersion and a lot of the social, that's what people love sharing, is those family experiences. And I think, for Aardman is, for a lot of our content is really for families. That 21.6 million on the BBC for Vengeance Most Foul was definitely families. So, if we can provide places that they can then take that joy and experience it together beyond sitting in front of the, the TV and the cinema screen. I think that is thrilling, and it was a joy to be there. I had such a good time. So I think our fans love that.
And you're doing something with the V&A soon as well. Tell us about that.
So the V&A is really exciting. So that is launching very soon, actually, in February.
I'm going to stop you again for international listeners. What's the V&A?
Oh, thank you so much. So the V&A is the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and it is an absolute iconic institution that supports, exhibitions around all kinds of art. And they have a specific venue in Bethnal Green in East London called the Young V&A, which is really for children and families. And so we're partnering with them on this wonderful exhibition, which is really a kind of celebration of the craft, but really invites children, families to kind of actually get stuck in. Like, there's a lot of hands-on opportunity for them to see the animation process from start to finish. And I think big part of, we've got the Aardman Academy, which trains next generation of animators, but I think a big part of Aardman is supporting that next generation of creativity, and this is a lovely way to do that with an amazing partner.
Yeah, sounds awesome.
And tell us about your D2C strategy, because we talked about helping, kind of inviting fans in a slightly more participatory way, and the social series and the Chaos, I think, is a really great way to do that. How are you going direct to them with products and that kind of e-com kind of strategy? What's there?
Well, I think for me, that's a big priority at the moment, is for us to look at that. We have great partnerships with different licensees and products all around the world. And because it's quite territory specific, that does lead itself to kind of thinking about e-commerce in quite a territory specific way, as well as trying to find the global overlays where we can. So it's something that's in play at the moment. We're working it out. But, certainly thinking about how we can show up on TikTok Shop, Instagram Shop, making it easier for fans. We have a great Wallace and Gromit and Shaun the Sheep online store with T-Mill, which has been fantastic, and saw, particularly after the film, Vengeance Most Foul, saw a real halo across that. But I think it is, how can we consistently make it easy for fans to find? So particularly this 50th anniversary year, we're relaunching 5 iconic products from the 50 years, if you like. So
name one.
Don't know if you go on then. Guess
there was a while.
The backpack.
There was a while you couldn't move for Shaun the Sheep backpacks.
So Baby Spice, thank you, Emma Bunton, but it's iconic shot. So the Shaun backpack, we've got the Feathers water bottle. There's a Gromit mug, which was, as we did a version actually with, I think it was for Christmas or Comic Relief, where the nose went red as you filled up your mug. So there's us trying to find those kind of iconic products and bring them to consumers. But partnerships is an area which we have done really well historically, but I think, again, thinking much more strategically about which are the partners that can really creatively add to the brand value. And that's why the M&S apparel range was so thrilling, because it was new design with them, really for that kind of new audience that perhaps it's coming across, at an age 9 to 16. The last Wallace and Gromit film was over 16 years ago. So this is the first time engaging with the brand, and how can we make it more relevant for them? So partnerships and that e-commerce piece are both kind of key for us.
And also, because Aardman are branching out beyond then your own brand too, because I know you announced development on Pingu. There was an announcement on Pokemon. So how are you guys thinking about where Aardman adds value in those sorts of relationships?
It's amazing opportunity to partner on those IPs. Creatively, the teams have been super excited, and it's really from a kind of creative slate standpoint. We have really looked at kind of what is that ecology that we think we need as a studio, and to both kind of creatively evolve, and also from a kind of capacity perspective, like how can we kind of make sure the studio is supported and active and kind of creating. And so we, key pillar is obviously our own IP. Shaun the Sheep, Wallace and Gromit, and that's a big part of our conversations around what does the future slate look like. So there are always things in development that we're thinking about for those brands, and then there is naturally a kind of an opportunity increasingly for working with those kind of partners on their IP, and Pokemon approached us kind of a few years ago, and it was felt like a really exciting opportunity to do that take. And I think what they have said that they've been excited by, and what we were excited by, is that mutual kind of respect for each other's creativity, and the benefit of bringing those two things together feels thrilling. And then Pingu, I mean, it's iconic Pingu, and it is so squash and squeezy in a kind of visual way that it felt like a real natural partnership with Mattel to want to explore that together. So I think it's important for us that we keep making our own shows and our own brands, but it's definitely part of what we look at is who are those partners. We partner with Lego as well on a campaign around their animator app to create some content for them. So there's definitely partnerships I think feels really exciting, but alongside our own IP and also new IP. We're always thinking about that, what's next from Aardman, and we've got developments both from a position where we can own that through kind of more traditional broadcast models, and then also with platforms where we might not have the IP, but it's a fantastic creative opportunity to develop some new characters in a new world. So it's sort of those three pillars, I guess, is how we look at it. What's the kind of guiding principles when you're looking to develop new IP? What makes something for you quintessentially Aardman-esque? We talk a lot about being more Aardman in everything we do.
Right.
And I think that is, so it's a good question. What does that mean? It is, I think, comedy is absolutely at the heart. It has got to have that Aardman irreverence, mischief, silliness, absurdity sometimes. I think having that at the heart of it's really important. The craft, which, yes, a lot of the time that manifests as stop frame, but we have incredible CG and VFX teams in-house that craft a lot of that work as well. So, with Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run feature films, that is always a complementary kind of combination of all of those different techniques. So thinking about the craft, the storytelling is, that is, the stories have got to stand up and be, absolutely compelling and fantastic. And we've always got to want to learn more. What does happen to Feathers McCall? But I think so. Yeah, the comedy, the craft, and the character. I think the characters. We talk a lot when we're talking to brand partners, particularly when we make ads for them. Commercials, which we do as well, about character being critical, because particularly in the advertising space, for them, that character is what makes that connection. And that it's a huge it's the emotional heart of how you connect with your audience. So those four: comedy, character, craft, and storytelling are the kind of pillars, if you like, of how we look at things.
It's interesting, just going back to the partnership with Pokemon, because just thinking about it as you were talking, it feels actually quite natural, even though they're two very different IP. But again, there's the craft, and Pokemon sits atop of the most valuable franchise tree for a reason, because they respect their fandom and they work their fandom hard. But it's interesting what you were saying about the designs with M&S as well. There's the iconic designs of Aardman, but actually that clash of styles with that more kind of anime and South Korean kind of sensibility that is really popular with teens. Actually, when you put those two together, that can be really interesting. You can still maintain the recognition of Aardman characters, but there's a new, fresh way to articulate it that feels a rich vein of opportunity for Aardman as it moves through its 50th year.
And we talk in that we talk a lot together about keeping that character at the core in each of those iterations. And that takes a lot more thought, I think, than people might realize. That pose of Gromit on a t-shirt has actually had a huge amount of thought put into it, so that it is truly Gromit. And if we're doing something with Shaun or Timmy in 2D for YouTube, we're thinking, well, what would Shaun do in this world? How, and it's that character. It comes back to that kind of the authenticity of across everything we do, whether it's, on a t-shirt, or whether it is, as part of an exhibition, or in something for social, it's got to feel authentic. And so we hold ourselves to a very high standard on that. But it's important, because otherwise, it's what people love, and you want to kind of keep that.
Yeah, there's a kind of a charm. There's such a charm to Aardman's brand and characters. You've got, and I think part of it is the characters, and part of it is the craft. There's almost a nostalgic element to it as well, and you can see how, it has a lot of appeal. I mean, one of the things I think lends itself to being a really fan first brand is that's handmade feel to the stop motion, even though there's a lot of CGI now, and there's kind of a mix of other animation styles. It always has that kind of tactile, kind of handmade quality to it. And I think people look at that and they know that they couldn't do that, but there's almost a feeling that they could try and do that animation themselves. And I think that has that real crossover with kind of fandoms as well. It makes it a really powerful brand.
There's definitely a connection. I mean, we're all seeing so much connection with more analog pursuits, if you like, knitting and and all of that. And I think there is something about, as you say, that connection to something handmade. We do a lot of workshops as well, where people can make a clay Shaun the Sheep, or feathers, or Gromit. And I actually did one last weekend for my kids' scouts group, which was 27 unruly 7-year-olds. But it is amazing to see how they, there's an absolute thrill in that handmade, even if the outcomes are, slightly creative version of what we would make. But I think that is,
going to pass approval, were they not?
But they weren't actually, they're pretty close to what the adults do when we do them, so it wasn't too bad. But it was, it's a thrill to be able to invite people to connect like that.
Yeah. It's that tactility, but I think it's also like the characters have remained fresh, right? Like, I don't know if it's because they're so irreverent or daft, or it's just fun and funny, and it's it's not that it just, they don't take themselves seriously. Sometimes they take themselves comically seriously, but that freshness of characters that hasn't aged, and that's difficult. Even if you look back at Disney movies from 20 years ago, right? That not all of that has stayed super fresh.
Yep.
That relevancy is a challenge, and we again, that's something that remaining kind of evergreen but relevant simultaneously is a real line to walk.
I guess mischief, and I'm thinking about Shaun the Sheep and Timmy. Kind of mischief is kind of enduring, isn't it? It's always appealing.
So are eyeball rolls with Gromit and Bitzer.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, there's a wonderful irreverence there, isn't there?
There is.
Gromit is one of those characters that everybody relates to in that moment of the eye roll. It's like,
and yet he's never said a word. It is all in his brow. We all know him just through his brow. It's amazing, the character that can come through. And I think, it's wonderful. We invite, we have a lot of people visit the studio, a lot of our partners, and it is, I'm still fangirling over it, frankly, when I get to see, then we've got metal workshops that create the metal skeletons. We've got incredible set designers who are using CAD and architecture kind of software to design the sets. We've got, it's the level of detail and craft that goes in is exceptional. And it's, a big part of what I'm excited about as well through our social and digital is actually lifting the lid on that on a more ongoing basis for fans, because a lot of our time lapses of the real film versus how you make it, where you see the hands coming in on a time lapse to sort of animate, is they do fantastically well on social. So the more we can do, again, to lift the lid on that craft, I think that really fans really respond to.
Yeah, and I think I saw Steven Spielberg talk about The Close Shave as one of his favorite movies ever, and it reminded me of how big some of the fans of Aardman are as well.
What's your favorite story relating to that? Since you joined, what's that story that you say at dinner parties where you're like, did you know this? Did you know that?
I think, oh God, that's such a good question. What is my favourite story? I mean, do you know, there's almost too many. We've actually just celebrated someone in the studio's 25-year anniversary here just before I stepped on the call, and because there is, you know, it's 50 years. There are so many. I've heard, you know, anecdotes from Dave Sproxton, our founder, on being on Concorde on the way to New York to do advertising pitches. I've heard, you know, the stories of Feathers McGraw, kind of the whole size of a lot of Feathers and the puppets being dictated by the joints on the metal skeleton, you know, this metal skeleton framework, because that's as small as you can get it. So that defines the size of the puppet. You know, the stories and the detail and you know how things came to be. I mean, Nick Parks, you know, talked about how Gromit started off as a cat, and you know, so there's just there's endless anecdotes, and I'm hopeful in this year we'll find ways across all of the things we do to bring those nuggets out for fans.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Well, tell us what, just before we finish, tell us what you're excited about. What going forwards? What's the
going
thing?
Forwards, what I'm
looking forward. You're looking forward to.
Well, this year, you know, we've got a lot happening this year that is really exciting. A lot I cannot say yet because it's yet to be announced. So watch this space.
Well, we got the clues. We got the clues.
But there's a lot more, you know, coming down the track, and I think particularly, you know, it is still thrilling for the studio to have a feature film release theatrically. Like, that is a huge deal. And so to have it's Shaun the Sheep, the Beast of Mossy Bottom, coming out this kind of around Halloween is just, you know, a huge thing. And it's in production. We finished shooting towards the end of, I think, May, June. So we are all guns blazing on that. And actually, you know, even tomorrow we're seeing the latest reel and all the latest shots in that. So it's just seeing that craft come together from the very first animatic to that finished film, and it's looking incredible, and it's going to be, I think, hopefully a real success with Sky and Studio Canal. So that's going to be a highlight for sure. And of course, a 50th birthday party.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing that with us. I'm definitely looking forward to the Beast of Mossy Bottom.
Thanks again, Emma, and thank you guys for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that discussion on how Aardman is adapting and innovating and finding new ways to connect to their audience. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening.